Today we're going to talk about how I fixed the vapor lock on this 1948 Pontiac Silver Streak. Hot engine, 105 outside, no vapor lock. One thing that causes vapor lock on these older cars is the ethanol fuel and the boiling point of the fuel. And as the fuel heats up, it creates air bubbles, plus the vibration of the car and a low pressure system. All these things add to vapor lock. Here we're in the desert and it's over 100 degrees every day now in the summertime. So it's almost impossible to drive some old cars in this kind of heat. So to resolve this, we're going to go through what I did on this 48 Pontiac Silver Streak. And it's got a straight 8, and this motor is a great motor, but it's subject to some issues that we just talked about with the heat. The manifold is right here below the carburetor, so it's going to put heat up onto the carburetor. And down here is the original fuel pump. It's been deleted, and down underneath the engine block in the front of the oil pan is an electronic fuel pump. So what we are going to do is going to shield some of those lines to cut down on heat transfer to the incoming fuel from the tank. And on these old cars, there's not a return line. So what we're doing is basically building a return line off of the existing fuel line. And what we had to do this was to get a fuel filter, an inline fuel filter that has a nipple that takes the excess fuel and air and reroutes it back to the tank. So this is the part number I used, and you can cross-reference that to get what you need, but basically it's an AMC or a Jeep fuel filter, and there's some other variants of this that will work also. It just needs to have the check valve that you can run the air and fuel back to the tank with. I purchased different types of shielding material for different diameters of fuel line to help cut down on some of that heat transfer in the engine compartment. And you can go and do the same, whatever you choose to order. As it should work as long as it's good quality and it's a heat shielding type material. These happen to be fiberglass and aluminum or aluminized fiberglass or silicone or a silicone based protector. So whatever you choose to do, anything is better than nothing. You'll also need some 1/4 inch line. The nipple that comes off of the fuel filter will be 1/4 inch, and so for at least this part number. And what I did is I ran soft line, 14 feet of it from this application. Just remember when you measure your return line to measure a couple extra feet, because you're going to have some turns and twists, and you always want to have a little bit extra and not be a little short. I use a 1/4 inch hard line for a pass-through through the top of the fuel tank, and I'll show you that here in a minute. Come take a look over here. Here's the original fuel line, and that's a 5/16 line, and I've shielded this with aluminized fiberglass all the way down to the fuel pump that's underneath the engine block. Then here I added the fuel filter that has the nipple. I made sure the nipple was up so that the extra air that is obviously rising is going to be on the top side. Okay. So here I use some fiberglass just to slide over as a sleeve over this hard line, the 5/16 hard line that goes in the carb. Originally I had a fuel bowl, the factory fuel bowl here, which had the fuel filter deleted, so it was just a bowl of fuel, and that was a heat sink right next to the engine here, and it was also causing some of the vapor lock. I'd get air in there and it was hard on a restart once I'd run it. So I deleted that. I saved it for later for our original, having the original parts for the vehicle to keep those. Don't want to throw anything away off these old cars. But I deleted it and tied in that directly to the carburetor. I wrapped this section 5 times thick with aluminum foil just to act as an extra shield for the heat. And anywhere you can add extra insulation, you should. Down here below the engine block, you can see I wrapped the fuel pump, the electronic fuel pump, with a 5 or 6 times thick aluminum foil just to repel some of the heat off the engine block. I didn't want that picking up heat and then cavitating. If the fuel pump is heated by that engine plus the outside temperature, it'll get air in there and it'll cavitate, and you'll be pumping air, and that can also increase your likelihood of having vapor lock and having a hard restart. So we're going to move to the back of the Pontiac here. So I ran the 1/4 inch fuel line off of that fuel filter in the front, along the frame rail, up through the back end, near the back end, and the shock towers, the strut towers, and here's where that fuel line terminates. I tied in this 90-degree from the hardware store, this elbow. It's a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch compression fitting, and I used a section of this 1/4 inch hard fuel line, and if you look closely, you can see it right here where the fuel line goes in. So I drilled a hole in the top of the fuel sending unit, 1/4 inch drill bit, and then I ran that line down as far and away from the pickup as I could, so that the fuel going back, the air and fuel going back, hot and aerated, would not interfere with the fuel pickup that's going back to the motor. On this application, I used JB Weld around the new 1/4 inch line, steel line, just to secure it, make sure it was not going to be moving, and then I zip tied the fitting to the other outgoing fuel line to make sure there was no movement. You're welcome to do it any way you like, but this is basically it. You've got the return line here, and that's bringing all that hot aerated fuel that causes the vapor lock and dumping it down and away in the tank. Some newer models of cars will have a tank that already has ports or holes that you can run the line directly back to, and then usually those are used for carbon canisters or different things on, let's say, 70s and 80s cars, and you can just cap those lines and use one of those as a return. So depending on your rig, you're going to have to do your own type of mod, but this is it in general, and it's worked out well. It's cut down on a lot of the issues I was having in this hot weather, and really it's the only way to remedy the situation. You got to get rid of the heat, and you got to bring that fuel, that hot aerated fuel, back and put it in the tank. So remember, on these old cars, make sure that you leave everything intact that you can. Try not to do any unnecessary modifying, cutting, or drilling. Keep it simple. It's not that expensive. I think this whole mod was done for under about $35 with all the materials. A lot of people say get a clothespin, the wood ones, and put them on the fuel line. That's kind of an old idea that's carried over, but it really doesn't work. That was what they did, is they put those clothespins on the tin foil that they'd wrap their lines with to try to cut down on the vapor lock, which is what you saw us do up front. And once the aluminum foil or the tin foil burned off or fell off, what was left over was those clothespins. And so it's just an outdated idea that doesn't work, but this will work, and different variants of this will work. Well, these old cars, they run great when they're dialed in. Hope you enjoyed this video, and good luck with your vapor lock remedy.